Now, dear Lord, you know what needs to be said and what should be said. And we just pray that you will take over so that only so much, only what is right may be in our hearts and minds at this time. Thank you, dear Lord. Amen. I do not want to spend too much time on koinonia itself, because I think that most of you have a pretty good idea of what koinonia is. There are perhaps a few that do not know that we are a training center that was started 17 years ago, incorporated, and 15 years ago began its program, and that we have gone through these years testing out what was a pilot project. There are many among you that have been associated with us. I think that I should say that Louise Eggleston, who was with us the other day, is president. Walter Fiskus was the first president, but very briefly. Frank Laubach took over after that, and Frank Laubach is still on the board and is an active member of the board, but he was also the president emeritus. Glenn Clark took over as president after that and was president until he began to withdraw from all of his responsibilities, apparently with a foreknowledge of the fact that he was passed on. Cliff Richmond Louise Eggleston is now the president. Cliff Richmond back here is the chairman of our executive committee. Tony Brayton was on our board for many years until when he became the president of the National Advisory Council here, he felt that he must withdraw from other responsibilities, but we hope that he'll be back with us on the board. Bertha Jarrett, you heard last night. So you see, it is just from that you see that we are a child of CFO. I like to say that the 12 men of prayer were the father of CFO, because there was where the idea was sort of first put forward, and that the camps are the mother of CFO. It's a little bit like Genevieve was talking to us the other day. Excuse me, yes, of koinonia. That's right. That's right. But at any rate, we are a child of CFO. Now, this brings us into a certain relationship as far as our destiny is concerned. And this is the thing that it seems to me we need to give our attention to today, and I am thrilled at the announcement of this planning committee, because this is embracing certainly many of the things that I am deeply concerned with, because I've got enough here to talk for a long time, Jim, but I know you folks will, Mel has got to have some time and so forth, and you'll want to be going to lunch, not late. But the destiny of CFO, which means all of the other related organizations, are bound together in one whole. Now, I feel that we need a reawakening to that destiny. And so really I had hoped to talk as much about CFO as about koinonia, because we are bound together. And the destiny of CFO was, in my mind and in my experience, to bring the kingdom of heaven on earth, to redeem the world, to save the world. It was one of a number of movements that were born at about that time. But I doubt if many of you are able to glimpse this, because you were not close enough to the center at the beginning. The CFO was born in the Depression. And it grew and expanded and grew in power during the Depression, the very time when you would expect the opposite to occur. But this was because it was to meet needs. And the condition of the world came into it right away. And if you take the period from 1930 to 1945, the prayer and love of the CFO, along with its growth, had a tremendous role to play. Now I'm sharing with you my conviction, because in the Depression, the first thing that much of the prayer centered around was what could be done in those areas. And there were certain pilot things begun there, right in the Twin Cities, in Minneapolis, that came out of the prayer that illustrated that. When it got along where we were close to war in 1939, those of you that were at Winnipesaukee, at Star Island, which preceded Winnipesaukee, know that the war was almost stopped through prayer. Now, it wasn't perhaps only our prayer, but our prayer was a focal point. And we had this amazing experience, which came in the midst of a stunt night, in which Hitler changed his mind at that very moment. And the papers the next morning announced it. Now, it's true that because other things were not ready, it went on after a few days. But historians, or rather students of military history, have said since that the proposals that Hitler made at that time were tremendously reasonable. And so if we had been ready, the war might conceivably have been stopped. But when it was not stopped, what then? Why, Glenn Clark started the Third Front, as well as the 12 Men of Prayer. And the Third Front went throughout this country, praying in schools of prayer in 25 of the major cities of the country, praying for our enemies, sending love to them, on the basis that when you send love, love inevitably must come back. And we saw all sorts of things happen in those events. And this is one thing that Glenn Clark used to do. He used to keep us in touch. Being so sensitive, he would know when certain things were happening. And so I think that it is reasonable to say that the prayers of the camps have been a large factor in giving us more time. But in the last 20 years, since 1945, incidentally, at one of the prayer broadcasts at Winnipesaukee in 1945, I could feel the change take place. Up to that time, the prayers had all been trying to lift the world to a higher power. And from that time on, it was as though you were at the top and you would say, ready, go. Go out. Now, at this point, somehow, perhaps we faltered, I don't know. But at any rate, we find ourselves today in a crisis such as perhaps the world has never been in before. There are among us here in the room people who have this kind of experience, who on several occasions have seen parts of our in visions. And I want to say that in this particular person that I'm referring to, the first time he had a vision like that, he just tried to brush it away. But it was fulfilled in tremendous detail in the Second World War. The very areas that were that were devastated, the limits of it and all that sort of thing. And so he was shown by that this thing had validity. And in more recent years, these visions have continued, showing that on several occasions there was a threat that much of our country would be destroyed. But possibly through prayer we have been given some additional years. But this is the kind of a situation in which we are living. And so we have to say, are we going to fulfill our destiny? Now, every one of these projects that have come out, or rather, the Foundation Farthest Out, Koinonia, the Prayer Tower, the McAllister Park Press, yes, and Marybrook, too. Although that has not perhaps been embraced as a part of the Camp family. But we are all a part of the same thing, and we each have a part and a role to play. But this means that there are related responsibilities. In other words, you representatives here of the CFO need to realize that you are responsible for some things with regard to koinonia. Koinonia is responsible likewise to the CFO because we are rooted in the same philosophy, but we are an arm of this destiny. Now, are we going to fulfill our destiny? Incidentally, I want to say that I guess we can't institutionalize Roland and Marcia, but they likewise have been an arm of this extension in moving out around the world in this way. Well, now then, where does koinonia come in? Because I guess I got to get back there sometime or other, although I could talk a long time about some of these things. Well, I must say this before we get back to koinonia, that we have got to see in specific areas some of the things that must be done. Now, I don't know whether you folks are aware that the trend toward disaster has not been reversed, that it's getting worse all the time. When Bertha and I were privileged to be with this Wingspread conference a short time ago, Frank Laubach spoke about the task ahead of us. And I wish every one of you had this 20-minute speech that he read. Because what he was saying is that we're not doing enough to fulfill the job before us as Christians. And this is true. And he said, while we have a lot of people doing it, we are not an army. And what is an army? An army is integrated. They work together. They move together. And this is true. Koinonia's relationship to the CFO has been almost casual. As though it could be picked up or dropped or something like that. Or, oh, yes, I've heard of that sometimes, and so forth and so on. Instead of being an organic part of something that is an army. That is the equivalent, an army of overcoming evil with good. That will work together, and this was what Frank Laubach was talking about, not particularly with regard to our CFO family, because we were a group of about 17 other organizations, but all working towards something here. But to sum this thing up about things going the wrong way, there are more illiterates in the world today than there were when Frank Laubach began his work. There are probably more people that have never heard the gospel of Christ in the world today than when we began. The rich people in the world, and we are a part of that because our country still possesses about half the wealth of the world, although we are 1/15 to 16th of the world's the rich people are still getting richer, and the poor people are still getting poorer. Now, how long can this go on? Well, all we know, and if you look at this slip that you have, this is the only literature we brought from Koinonia this time because it concerns our summer thing, and I don't want you to read it now as far as that's concerned, but if you'll turn over on one side, you'll see that it refers, the focus this time will be on Africa, sub-Sahara Africa, and on Latin America, because in those two continents, revolution is about to break out. That's in many places. We're in a revolutionary era. Maybe area too, I don't know. But era. And in this revolutionary era, everything has to change. Koinonia right now is going through re-evaluation as to how can we more effectively do our job. But we need hundreds of teachers that will be ready to go out to Africa and Latin America because they've got to have education. But let's pray that they have it in relationship to the gospel and spirit of Christ. If they don't get it that way, they don't know. Another thing we need to do, we need to Christianize the Peace Corps. Now, we've had a few people, and the Peace Corps has done a fine job within limits, but they don't do it in a Christian sense. We need to multiply the projects. We have a project such as the Liberian Project, and thank the Lord, John Lynn is here, and the foundation that he works for gave us a tremendous lift on this Liberian Project, but there still needs to be done and expanded, and we still need the assistance of every one of you on that. Now, actually, what we need, and I've sat here for the last hour and listened to this discussion, and I haven't quite known how to, in the light of what I want to say, you know what I think we need? I think we need a war fund. Now, we used to, at Koinonia, call it America's War of Amazing Kindness Everywhere, awake. But it's that kind of a war of amazing kindness, a war of love, a war of goodness, overcoming evil, and so forth. But we need a war fund of at least $1 million a year. Now, if we've got 10,000 CFOs, well, what does that add up to? $100 a year. Now, is the world worth $100 a year to you? $2 a week? I feel ashamed to suggest so little. Ashamed. Why, if any one of us knew that something was involving the life of the happiness of someone near and dear to us, why, we'd spend hundreds, thousands, as much as we could. We'd mortgage our future for it. And actually, right today, we're paying out, I don't know how many, 10 times that amount for the average on war that's going, and most of it is being completely wasted. And if we don't think enough of these things here to come forth with, now this would be a thing that would apply to the whole CFO family. Foundation Farthest Out ought to be sending many more people out around than they have been. The McAllister Park Press ought to be flooding us with literature all over the place that would be in this direction. The Prayer Tower ought to be on a job 24 hours a day. I guess they are, because I know when I was sick that I heard from them every day, bless them. But to get into this world picture, and every one of us ought to be praying with love. Now, it's our faith that love and prayer are the most powerful things in the world. And so we've got to do that. But we've got to know something of the job that we're up against. And when we do know that, well, then maybe we can do something about it. But it's got to expand. One of the things that Mel, are you all right? Okay. Now I just want to take a brief look back into history. Because when you begin to talk about love and prayer, although I want you to know, I didn't tell you one thing that back in those periods of 30 to 45, not only did these schools of prayer all over the nation change many events with Hitler and others at that time, but when Japan came into the war, and we prayed for that at 3 consecutive camps, something so miraculous happened when MacArthur went in there, when Japan surrendered, because we had said that, and this was our lever with Glenn Clark, that the only way in which we could ask an unconditional surrender, because the effrontery of us asking them to surrender unconditionally to us. Who in the world were we? The only way we could bring this into harmony would be to say, all right, we will surrender unconditionally to God. And when we do that, then it will be safe for anyone to surrender unconditionally to us. And Glenn Clark took that idea and he went to work with it in 3 camps, and he said, I predict that when the 3rd camp does this, the war will come to an end. And that's exactly what happened. And the little Nisi girl that he used as the symbol by which Japan made its, in other words, after all this, she came forward and she kneeled representing Japan at Glenn Clark's knee to make this unconditional surrender after we had first made our unconditional surrender. And as she did that, at the end of our all night of prayer, the word came that Japan had surrendered. But when MacArthur entered in there, he entered in there so that even the broadcasters said, why, this is though friends were coming in. They couldn't understand it. And I know it was because of the prayer that was undergirding the whole thing. That little Nisi girl, I don't know why she did this, but she later got married, and she was working at the same time. She used to send $40 a month to Koinonia. And she didn't, I'll bet she didn't make more than 4 times that. Maybe 5 times. Later on, she died. She was a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful child of God. But she knew what things were worth, one way. Well, now, I don't know how to stop. But we believe, oh yes, I was going to say this thing, that I think perhaps the only parallel that we can put to this matter of love and prayer as being a power that will lift the world and will fulfill our destiny and will establish peace. But it's got to overcome the racial bitterness in our own country. We can't have any more Watts, but we will have them unless it is overwhelmed by love. And these things are in all parts of the country. We know that. And we've got to have people working, is it VISTA that the government call the volunteers in our own country? Is that? Huh? VISTA? VISTA? I can't think of what it stands for, except that I know that it's the group that are to work down in the inner cities where they contact these youngsters that have never been loved, and consequently, and you see, we're at the point, we've got to get people so that they are employable in our civilization. There are just multitudes of problems. It wouldn't be possible to name them all. And until our love is strong enough that it is equal to things like this, the job will not be Christ's love. So what we have to ask ourselves is, are we able? What Christ has to ask us, just as when John and James came to him. And also, if you will read again what, and most of the chapter of what Jesus read in his own synagogue when he came there, you'll see what he was talking about. And when he said, "This day is this scripture fulfilled in your ears," but he didn't read the next part, which said, "You shall rebuild the waste cities, and the strangers shall come and feed your flocks," and all this sort of thing. This is a description of our world today. And so all these things have to be brought into the realm of our love, and what our love can do, and what our love must do. And it must reach out beyond anything that it has reached thus far. Now, incidentally, this is one of the things that why koinonia is necessary, is because before people go out, they've got to have a deeper type of training and of testing before they're going to be able to go out and deal with things like this in all parts of the world. But when they catch it and when they do it, it's glorious. And we've had enough years to prove that it works. Now what we need is every CFO should be a recruiting station for koinonia. If every CFO wanted to appoint a member on some, I don't think they could on our official board, but on some other board, why, the general counsel or something like that, why, you ought to do it. We ought to be able to get a half a dozen people from the groups that you would go on, and you ought to go out and get a hold of young people with a challenge like I've been talking about. A challenge that would get them in there and say, "Now come on in and get ready for this thing. We've got to go. We've got to become an army of the Lord." But are we able? Are we able to drink the cup that Christ was willing to drink? And John and James said, "Yes," very confident. And Jesus looked at them and shook his head. And then I can see him say, "Well, you shall." But he knew that they didn't know at all what lay ahead of them. But he knew that they would come through. And so this is why koinonia has to be tied in with CFO as never before. And CFO tied in with koinonia. And in the same way with the foundation farthest out, and with the prayer tower, and with McAllister Park Press, and Roland and Marcia, and I could probably go on naming some others, but we've all got to be moving together. And actually, when this committee was announced, I thought, this is it. This is the beginning where perhaps we can become an army of the Lord together. Well, I better stop.